Montana Territory, August 1879. The sky burned orange over the Bitterroot Mountains when Zacharias Clay rode into the town of Twin River, dust and sweat clinging to him like a second skin. He was hunting no outlaw, chasing no cattle herd. He came for her. He dismounted in front of the old boarding house on Main Street, the one with the chipped green shutters and a lilac bush curling around the porch rails. He tied his mare loosely, then just stood there, hat in his hands, staring at the second-floor window. He had not seen her in nearly 5 years. Inside, behind that window, was the only woman who had ever made him feel like a man worth something. Her name was Marabeth Truan. She had been the sheriff's daughter once, and he the ranch hand with a busted past and a scar across his ribs that no doctor could stitch shut. He left because he thought loving her wasn't something he deserved, not when her life was still full of choices and his was already carved out in dirt and regret. But now she was back in Twin River, widowed, alone, and with 2 children, twins. He had heard that from the blacksmith when he passed through Missoula. Her husband, a traveling freight hauler, abandoned her 2 winters ago, left her with a broken stove, a mortgage she could not pay, and a pair of hungry mouths she kept clothed with her sewing needle. Zacharias had not come to fix her. He had not come to offer anything but himself. He just hoped it would be enough. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, then stepped up onto the porch. He knocked once, then twice. No answer. He sat down on the top step, laid his hat beside him, and waited. Inside, Marabeth stood behind the lace curtain with her breath caught between her ribs. She had known it was him the second she heard the knock. She had known, because no one else knocked like that, soft, unsure, and still so steady. She had not seen Zacharias Clay since the spring she turned 19. He had kissed her once then, behind the barn, with a look in his eyes like he was drowning. Then he left town the very next morning without a word. Now he was back, and his eyes were the same stormy, tired, but still holding that quiet ache only she had ever understood. "Are you going to open the door?" a small voice asked behind her. Marabeth turned. Her daughter, Elsie, stood in the hallway in her nightdress, rubbing one eye. Her brother, Eli, leaned against the wall, arms crossed tight. "It is late," Eli said. "You do not have to talk to him if you do not want to." She looked back out the window. Zacharias had not moved. "I know," she said, but she could not stop looking at him. Night fell slow and thick. Lamps flickered out across the street. The boarding house quieted. Still, Zacharias waited. He did not pace. He did not knock again. He just sat there, his hands open on his knees, like he had all the time in the world to prove he meant what he could not yet say. Marabeth sat beside the window, her sewing untouched in her lap. Her fingers trembled too much to thread the needle. Her chest ached with old memories, him teaching her how to ride when she was 15, him holding her wrist when she cut her hand on fence wire, him whispering he loved her the night before he vanished. He had broken her heart, but somehow, seeing him again, it did not feel broken anymore. It felt like it was waiting. Sometime past midnight, a storm rolled in. Wind curled under the porch eaves. Rain tapped the roof. Still, he did not leave. She lit a lantern and stepped into the hallway. Her bare feet made no sound as she descended the stairs. She heard her own breath louder than the wind. She paused at the door. He was soaked through. The rain had flattened his hair to his head. His shirt clung to his shoulders. But his eyes were still steady, still waiting. Marabeth opened the door. Zacharias stood. She looked up at him, lips parted. The porch light flickered behind her. For a moment, they did not speak. "You waited." Her voice was soft, but it did not shake. "I told myself I would not leave until you came out," he said. "Why?" "Because I left once before. I will not do it again. Not unless you send me away." She stared at him, then stepped forward. He swallowed hard. "Marabeth," she kissed him. No hesitation. No words. Just her hands on his chest, her lips finding his in the rain, like she had been aching for this as long as he had. The kiss was not perfect. It was wet, cold, and their noses bumped. But it was real. When she pulled back, her eyes were glassy. "You broke my heart. I know. You left me. I know. But I kept loving you anyway." He reached up and touched her cheek. "I never stopped loving you." She leaned into his palm, then took his hand and led him inside. Eli stood at the top of the stairs. He stared down at Zacharias, his jaw tight. Zacharias looked up at him. "You must be Eli." The boy did not answer. Marabeth touched her son's shoulder. It is late. Go back to bed. Eli hesitated, then turned and disappeared down the hall. Zacharias turned to her. You do not have to explain anything to me. I just want to be near you. However you will have me. She gave a small, tired laugh. You are still the same fool. He smiled for the first time. And you are still the same girl who made me believe I could be more than what I was. Marabeth looked at him for a long time, then reached for his hand again. Come on. Sit by the fire. Dry off. And so he did. He stayed the night, but not in her bed. He slept on the parlor floor, near the hearth, wrapped in a quilt she had stitched herself. Her son checked on him once before dawn, but said nothing. In the morning, the sun rose over the mountains, and Marabeth found him still asleep, arms tucked under his head, a piece on his face she had not seen since he was a boy. She stood over him, brushing a lock of hair from his brow. He woke slowly, blinking up at her. Morning, she said. He smiled. You are even prettier in sunlight. She rolled her eyes but blushed. I made coffee. I would like that. He followed her into the kitchen, where Elsie sat at the table, swinging her legs. Are you going to marry my mama? She asked, bold and bright. Zacharias blinked, then looked at Marabeth. I hope so, he said. Marabeth did not look away. She only smiled. Elsie's question lingered in the air longer than it should have, but no one rushed to fill the silence. Marabeth poured coffee into a chipped enamel mug, the one with the hairline crack near the rim. She set it in front of Zacharias without ceremony. Her papa didn't like folks who didn't answer plain questions, Elsie added, peeling the corner off a biscuit with a small, practiced hand. Zacharias glanced at Marabeth. I figure your mama can speak for herself. Marabeth didn't look up. She appreciates that. Eli stepped into the kitchen barefoot, his pants cuffed at the bottom. He didn't greet anyone, just took a seat beside his sister and reached for the butter without asking. Zacharias sipped the coffee. It was strong and bitter, just the way he remembered her father making it. I'll be heading out to the livery after this, he said, voice quiet. Your horse all right? Marabeth asked, still not meeting his eyes. She's fine, just needs a rub down and a feed of oats. I'll pay for the stall. You don't owe anything for one night under my roof. I wasn't talking about the roof. Eli's knife paused halfway through the biscuit. Elsie looked between the two adults, then down at her plate. Marabeth finally raised her eyes. You planning to stay in town long? He didn't answer right away. The ticking of the wall clock filled the space between them. I came because I wanted to see you. But I can find work if that makes the difference. I didn't ask you to find work. I know. They held each other's gaze a moment longer before a knock came at the front door. Zacharias stood first. I'll get it, Eli said, rising. He returned a moment later with a folded envelope in one hand and a look Marabeth didn't like on his face. From the bank, he said, setting it on the table. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened it carefully. Her eyes scanned the page, then she folded it again and set it down. That man wants more than he's owed, she said. Zacharias watched her, but said nothing. Elsie leaned across the table. Is it bad? No, Marabeth said, smoothing Eli's hair as he sat again. It's just a letter. Zacharias waited until the children had gone to the back room to fetch their school slates before speaking again. If you need help with that, I didn't tell you about it for a reason. You didn't tell me anything. I found out from a stranger. That was my right. I know it was. She turned to the stove and busied herself with scraping the bottom of the pan, though it was already clean. I've worked hard to keep them fed, she said. I don't need someone riding in to fix what they don't understand. I didn't come to fix anything. Then why are you here? He stood slowly, careful not to crowd her. I've had 5 years to think about what I threw away. If you'd told me to ride on last night, I would have done it. But you didn't. So I stayed. Not to fix, just to be near. She stayed turned away, but her shoulders eased a little. I still don't know what I want from you, Zach. That's all right. I'm not asking for anything today. He walked to the doorway, pausing as the children re-entered with their satchels. Elsie offered him her drawing board, eager to show off a sketch of a pine tree with a crooked trunk. He crouched beside her and studied it like it was gold leaf. That's a fine tree, he said. Looks like the kind that's seen storms and kept standing. She beamed and tucked the board back into her bag. Marabeth watched from across the room, arms crossed lightly over her stomach, her expression unreadable. Eli lingered behind his sister, eyes narrowed. You planning to come back? He asked Zacharias directly. That depends on a few things. Like what? Whether your mama lets me. Eli gave a short nod, neither approving nor dismissing. Then he turned and followed his sister out the door, their boots thudding down the steps. Zacharias faced Marabeth one last time before leaving. I'm going to the livery now. After that, I'll be around the blacksmith's. He said he's short a hand for the week. If you need me, you'll know where I am. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. He left with that. The day passed slowly. Marabeth didn't sew. She stood at the window longer than she'd meant to, hands clasped behind her back, watching the breeze bend the lilac bush outside. When dusk came, she set a second place at the table. Not because she expected him, but because it felt right. He didn't come. She sat with her children, listened to Elsie chatter about her teacher's new bonnet, and nodded along while Eli spoke of a neighbor's broken fence post and how he might mend it if he had time. After the dishes were washed and the children tucked into bed, she stepped out onto the porch and sat where he had waited the night before. The cushion held a faint warmth still, like his presence hadn't entirely left. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew he had stayed through the rain, and that meant something. She sat there until the stars came out, then went inside and left the door unlatched. The blacksmith's shed let off a steady haze of smoke into the morning air, metal clanking in its gut like a slow-beating heart. Zacharias stood beside the anvil, sleeves rolled, palms blackened from ash and sweat. He wasn't there for coin. He needed the weight of work, the rhythm of something honest. Marabeth watched him from the lane, hidden behind the post of the dry goods shop. She hadn't meant to walk this far, but her feet had taken her past the bakery, past the milliner's, and stopped here. She hadn't brought the letter from the bank. She hadn't brought anything but herself. Zacharias hadn't seen her yet. He was focused, steady. He moved like the fire inside him had found a place to belong. You gonna say something or keep hiding behind that post? He said, eyes never leaving the horseshoe he was shaping. She stepped into the open. I wasn't hiding. No, I was watching. He glanced up then, just briefly. What did you see? A man who's always done better with his hands than his words. He set the iron aside. That's fair. She walked closer, stopping just shy of the heat. Eli's going out to the Tyler place this afternoon. Said he wants to learn how to string wire. He'll do fine. He listens more than he talks. He gets that from his father. Zacharias didn't answer. Marabeth folded her arms. Elsie asked if you'd be coming to supper. He turned to face her fully. Do you want me to? I don't invite folks out of politeness. His jaw worked once. Then I'd be glad to. She nodded, then looked past him at the forge. You always wanted to build more than you tore down. I tried to. Didn't always manage it. She took a slow step forward. You're managing it now. He wiped his palms on a rag and stepped out into the light, the soot on his skin deepening the lines around his mouth. You said once I had a choice, that I didn't have to turn into the men I came from. I did. You were the only one who ever said it. They stood close now, neither of them reaching, but nothing between them but air. I was 17, she said quietly. I thought love could fix anything. Zacharias's voice dropped. And now I know it can't, but it can hold through the things it can't fix. He breathed out slow. I'm not asking for forgiveness. You already have it. Their eyes held. Marabeth turned toward home, and after a moment, he followed. That evening, the porch smelled of fried onions and the faint sweetness of cornmeal. Eli sat on the steps, shirt sleeves rolled, a cut on his hand from barbed wire wrapped in clean cloth. Zacharias sat beside him, not saying much, just handing over the tin of salve when the boy reached for it. Marabeth watched through the open window, setting the table without asking for help. She didn't need help. That wasn't why she'd let him in. Supper passed without much talk. Elsie told a story about a rabbit that had stolen a turnip from the neighbor's garden, and Eli corrected her when she swore it had been a fox. Zacharias didn't interrupt. He let them speak, let the room carry on without needing to make space for him. After dishes were cleared, Elsie curled up on the rug with a book from the church shelf. Eli took the porch chair nearest the door and nodded when Zacharias passed him, heading after Marabeth as she stepped into the backyard with a tin basin of peelings. The sky was bruised with dusk, the last light curling over the hills. She knelt to scatter the scraps beneath the apple tree, then stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. He stayed a short distance back. You always kept this place neat. I had to. No one else was going to. He studied the fence line, the way the garden rows held straight even after a dry summer. You built something here. She turned toward him. I didn't do it alone. I had to at first, but I didn't stay alone. That's different. His voice was low. Are you still alone? She didn't answer right away. Then she stepped toward him. I don't think I want to be. His breath caught in his throat. But I need to know this time you won't disappear. I won't. You say that now. I say that knowing I've spent every day since I left regretting it. And not just because I missed you, but because I tried to live without the only place I ever felt like I belonged. Her voice was steady. I'm not the same girl. He nodded. I'm not the same man. She looked at him for a long time, then reached out and took his hand. I want someone who'll carry the quiet with me, who won't shy from the hard days. I'm not afraid of quiet, he said, and I've seen hard days. I want someone to share them with. The light was nearly gone now, but she didn't step back. I don't need saving, Zacharias. I wouldn't try. I just want to stand beside you. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his chest. He folded his arms around her, careful, like she was something long lost and only just found. Neither said anything more. Inside, the children's voices rose in laughter, and somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote called out once into the night. They stayed there until the stars showed, then went inside, together. The sun lifted slow the next morning, casting long, gold-edged shadows across the worn floorboards of Marabeth's kitchen. She moved with a quiet surety, folding a damp cloth and hanging it near the stove to dry. The fire had burned low during the night, but the warmth still clung to the walls. Zacharias stood by the door, fastening the last button of his shirt. His hair was still damp from the pump-out back. I'll head out early, he said, tying his bandana. The blacksmith's got a wagon tongue needs fixing before noon. Marabeth nodded, adjusting the collar of Eli's coat as the boy tugged it on. You'll be back by supper? She asked, not looking at Zacharias. I will. Elsie skipped in, one of her braids half loose. Ma, the hems come out of my dress again. Marabeth crouched beside her, fingers already reaching for the thread basket. You've been climbing that gate again, haven't you? Elsie grinned, unrepentant. Only a little. Zacharias leaned against the doorframe, watching the three of them. The morning felt settled in a way he hadn't expected, like the land after a long drought. Not quite green yet, but softened at the edges. I passed the old schoolhouse yesterday, he said. Marabeth didn't pause her stitching. They shut it up last winter. No teacher to keep it running. Thought maybe you could take it on. She glanced up, brows drawn. I've seen your books, he said. The way you keep Elsie and Eli learning, even without a classroom. Town could use someone who won't waste time on thick talk. I've got work enough here. You've got more in you than mending and washing. She tied off the thread and looked at him fully. And who's to mind the house while I'm off teaching? He didn't flinch. I could. Marabeth rose slowly. You'd take on my chores? My children. I'd take on what's mine to carry. If you'll let me. Eli stepped out onto the porch before she could answer, leaving the door swinging. Elsie followed, tugging her satchel behind her, and Marabeth moved after them without another word. Zacharias stayed behind, hands braced on the doorframe. The air had sharpened since dawn, and the wind carried a scent of something distant, pine smoke, maybe, or the start of autumn. By midday, he'd split a cord of wood behind the blacksmith's, his shirt clinging to his back and his fingers blistered raw. He didn't stop. Not when his shoulders ached. Not when the sun climbed high enough to make the air shimmer. Later, he walked the long path behind the boarding house, boots thudding against packed earth, and paused by the chicken yard. Marabeth stood there, sleeves rolled, scattering feet. A hen pecked at her boot. I mended the gate out front, he said. She didn't turn. Didn't ask you to. I know. She let the feed fall in a steady rhythm, then dusted her hands on her apron. You always do that. Fix what's broken without asking if it needs fixing. He stepped closer. I'm trying to learn better. You think I need help with every loose board and cracked beam? No, but I want to stand beside you. That's all. She looked up at him then, eyes tired but clear. You're not just asking for a place to rest, are you? I'm asking for a place to stay. Her breath caught, just once. Then she walked past him, headed for the house. After a few steps, she paused. You still planning to be back for supper? I am. Then you'd best wash up. I don't want Eli saying you brought the whole barn to the table. That night, the four of them sat close, the oil lamp casting amber light across the walls. Elsie told a riddle she'd learned from a traveling peddler, and Eli rolled his eyes but smiled when Marabeth caught him at it. After the meal, Zacharias followed Marabeth into the yard again, where the moon sat low and round above the hills. She leaned against the fence, arms crossed against the chill. I used to think I had to keep everything balanced or it would all fall apart. You don't have to do that alone anymore. I know. She looked at him slowly, like she was letting the words settle before believing them. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving of a wolf, rough-shaped, but recognizable. I made it this morning, he said. Used to whittle when I couldn't sleep. Keeps my hands from turning restless. She took it gently, brushing her thumb along its curve. You always did have quiet hands. I want to build something here. Not just fences and walls. A life. You're not afraid of what that means? He shook his head. Nothing worth having ever came easy. She stepped closer, the carving still warm from his pocket. If I say yes, I'm not promising it'll be easy. I don't want easy. I want true. She kissed him again, slower this time. Not like the first a rush of need and years lost, but steady and sure, like a promise made under open sky. When they pulled apart, she didn't let go of his hand. I want you here, she said. Not just in this house. In this life. He nodded once, no need for more words. Inside, the lamp still burned, casting soft light on the table where two children slept with their heads resting on folded arms, their breath even and untroubled. Marabeth looked toward them, then back to Zacharias. Let's go in, she whispered. And together, they did. The first frost came overnight, silvering the field grasses and pinching the last tomatoes in the garden before Marabeth had a chance to pull them. She stood at the edge of the yard that morning, a shawl drawn snug over her shoulders, watching the light creep slow over the ridgeline. The trees were starting to yellow, and the air carried the sharp, dry scent of cedar bark and cooling earth. Behind her, the house stirred to life, floorboards creaking under Eli's early steps, the rustle of Elsie tugging on her boots, the scrape of the stove door as Zacharias coaxed the fire back to flame. The sound of him there, steady and unhurried, had already begun to settle into the rhythm of her days. She didn't turn when he stepped onto the porch. You'll lose the last of your squash if you don't pull them today, he said quietly. I know, she said. I'll help. I thought you had that wagon to finish at the blacksmith's. I finished it last night. She let the quiet stretch between them a moment longer, then nodded once and turned for the garden. He followed. They worked in easy silence, their breath visible in the morning air, their fingers stiff with cold. She passed him the basket when hers was full, and he set it near the steps without being asked. When the last gourd was pulled and the vines cleared, she stood and brushed the dirt from her palms. You always did like early hours, she said. I like the way the world feels before it fills up with noise. She looked over at him. I used to think I'd never have quiet again. Not the good kind. You do now? The door opened behind them, and Elsie leaned out, her cheeks flushed. Ma, Miss Laren stopped by. She says the town council's meeting this afternoon. They want to talk to you about the schoolhouse. Marabeth frowned. They didn't say anything about that before. She said they want to know if you'll take it on permanent. Zacharias didn't speak. He only studied her face. Marabeth turned to the girl. Tell her I'll come by before dinner. And wear your mittens when you go. It's colder than it looks. Elsie nodded and disappeared inside. Zacharias waited until the door closed again. You thinking about saying yes? I haven't decided. You'd be good at it. I'd have to leave the mending and the laundry to someone else. I can take it. Eli can help. She glanced at him. And you don't mind your hands in wash water now? I mind less than I mind you giving up something that's yours. Her expression softened. Later, after the children had gone to help their neighbor bring in hay, Marabeth stood at the edge of the schoolhouse, her arms folded against the wind. The building leaned a little to the west, the windows dusted with cobwebs, but the bones were still strong. The door creaked when she opened it. Zacharias walked the room behind her, running a finger along the chalk ledge. You could teach them more than how to read and write. I'd have to fight for books. And benches. Then we'll fight for them. Her eyes met his. He stepped closer. You've given so much, Marabeth. It's time you get to choose something for yourself. I chose you. You can choose more than one thing. Her breath caught, and she leaned into him without hesitation. His hands settled gently at her waist. "I didn't think my life would ever feel like mine again," she said. "It's yours now." They stayed inside until the shadows stretched long across the plank floor. Outside, a hawk circled above the hills, and the air turned colder. When they returned home, the children were already inside, their cheeks red from the wind. That night, after the supper dishes were dried and stacked, Zacharias stepped out onto the porch and returned with something wrapped in oilcloth. "I was going to wait," he said, undoing the knots. "But there's no sense in waiting when I already know." She looked down. Inside the cloth lay a simple ring, gold dulled with age, the edge thin from wear. "It was my mother's," he said. "She didn't have much, but she kept this for me. Said one day I'd know who to give it to." Marabeth stared at it, then at him. "I don't need a ring." "I know, but I want you to have it anyway." She picked it up slowly, then slid it onto her finger. "It fits," she said. "I hoped it would." They married on the last Sunday before the first snow, in the church where her father had once held his badge against his chest like a promise. The pews were full, neighbors, children, even the blacksmith who cried behind his beard and pretended it was from the cold. Eli stood beside Zacharias, tall and straight in a borrowed coat, and Marabeth took his hand before she turned to her groom. Elsie scattered pine boughs instead of flowers and beamed when Zacharias lifted her up after the vows and whispered something that made her laugh so hard she buried her face in his collar. They walked home together, no wagon, just boots crunching over the frozen path, the sky clear and wide above them. That night, the fire burned low in the stove, and the house held a stillness that wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of footsteps, of a life that had found its way forward. Zacharias lay beside her, hand resting over hers, the ring catching the firelight. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. She turned toward him, her voice warm. "You do now?" And he did. By spring, the schoolhouse had been reopened. The benches were mended, the windows scrubbed clean. Marabeth taught 6 children by day, and at night, she walked home to a steady man and the family they'd made whole again. Eli took to carving fence posts with a practiced eye, and Elsie read aloud by lamplight, her voice clear and proud. The garden grew straight rows of beans and squash, and Zacharias built a new coop that didn't lean. They didn't speak often of the years before. They didn't need to. They had this now, a life not perfect, but real. A life that held warmth and laughter and hands that stayed. And they lived it, side by side, every day that came.